Sid, so great to see you. Thank you so much for jumping on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's awesome to be connecting. How you doing?
I'm doing great, doing fantastic. How are things in Perth as we are slowly coming out of this lockdown we've experienced?
Listen, things are going really well here actually. The sun's out today, so I'm always in a happy mood when the sun's out. Slightly chilly this morning, 6 degrees, so that's the weather report for anyone who cares about what the weather is in Perth. But things are going back. Things are coming back around a little bit, so now restrictions have been eased and people are kind of out and about. It's our first day back at work here as well. So this week, all of WA, they've been encouraged to go back to work in a physical sense in your offices. And cafes and bars and restaurants are opening back up, 20-person limit. But again, there's signs of life everywhere now, so that's exciting.
That's awesome. We're seeing the same type of thing where I live here in Brisbane. And it's just fun to see places that were very quiet, almost dead, it felt like, coming back to life slowly. So super fun to see that. Yeah. Well, listen, I want to dive into some questions that I have for you that I like to call 60 seconds with Perko. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a couple of options and you pick one or the other and we'll try to get through these in 1 minute or less. So, and this is just to help people get to know you a little bit. So which would you prefer, coffee or tea?
Ooh, neither. I don't drink tea or coffee.
You don't drink hot drinks at all?
At all. Hot chocolate.
Okay. Oh, you do hot chocolate. Okay, that's a great option. That's a great option. All right, Apple or PC?
Oh, Apple.
Apple, okay. Beaches or mountains?
Beaches.
Okay. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Netflix or YouTube?
Oh, hard one, but I'm going to go with Netflix.
Okay. Call or text?
Always text.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone.
That's
Don't
okay.
call me.
Don't call. Just text her. You'll get
text me.
You'll get a faster response if
100%.
you text. Podcast or music?
Ooh, music.
Okay.
That's a tough one. Maybe podcast. Ooh, I might have to choose both. Is that allowed?
Okay.
I don't know. I'm gonna go with
for
both.
it. Both, okay. Cake or pie?
Don't ask me food questions. We'll be here for a long time.
Long time?
Cake, pie, cake.
Okay, cake. What's worse for you, laundry or dishes?
Laundry.
Okay. Hamburger?
Quite like doing the dishes.
Oh, you do like doing the dishes?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good for Dev. That's awesome.
Dev. Problem is Dev also likes doing dishes. No one likes doing the cooking.
Nice. That's awesome. Hamburger or taco?
Hamburger. Oh.
Okay. Passenger or driver?
Never learned to drive, so I guess I have to pick passenger.
Yeah, passenger. You don't drive at all.
Never learned at all.
Interesting. That's great.
Yeah.
I want to explore more about that. That's an interesting thing. All right. At the movies, lollies or popcorn?
Popcorn.
Okay. And for those in the northern hemisphere, that's candy or popcorn. Are you a saver or a spender?
I'd love to be a saver, but I am in fact a spender.
Okay. Is Dev? Is he a saver?
He is a saver.
Okay,
so I guess we balance each other out. So that's good.
Absolutely. All right. City or countryside?
City.
Yep. Shopping online or shopping in the store?
In a store.
Yeah,
I like
to
looking
go
at it,
in and see
seeing
it.
Try it. Yeah.
Okay. Working alone or on a team?
Oh, on a team.
Yeah.
Definitely on a team.
Pen or pencil?
Pen.
Okay. And then paper or tablet?
Paper.
So you like to grab a pen and a piece of paper and write some things down. That's awesome.
Absolutely. And then I'll probably transfer them onto a tablet, so don't ask me about efficiency on that one. But starting off, paper and pen.
Paper and pen. I'm the same way. I start paper and pen, and then I oftentimes I end up dictating it because I don't like typing too much, so I dictate to my computer and it types it up. So that's awesome. Hey, those are some fun questions to get to know you a little bit. But for those people that have never met you, Sid, I want to get you to introduce yourself in some ways. You live in Perth, which is in Western Australia. For those that are listening maybe from a place like the United States, it's kind of like the Los Angeles of Australia, basically. It's the West Coast.
I love that. Let's go with that one.
Yeah. A lot of people in Perth would probably say they don't see any resemblance to LA, but it's still the West Coast. But you are not originally from Perth. Your accent actually sounds very British, but you're not from England originally either. You actually grew up in Sri Lanka. which I grew up watching some of the greatest cricketers of all time coming out of the subcontinent, especially
We
from
like
Sri
you,
Lanka.
yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit of your journey. What took you from Sri Lanka to Perth and all the stops in between? Give us kind of the rundown on who is Sid.
Sure. So, yeah, I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, in the capital, in Colombo. And listen, since you brought up cricket was a huge part of our
Was it?
childhood. Absolutely. Now,
That's
I
so
can't play
cool.
cricket to save my life. Like, nobody throw me a ball, I will probably deflect it and not
Yep.
be able to catch it. So there is that. But yeah, like the whole country would come to a standstill when there was a Sri Lanka versus anybody cricket game on. So
Yeah.
that was a huge part of it. And yeah, so born and raised in Sri Lanka. And then I went to Nottingham in England for university. And
Okay.
so went to study psychology there, which I absolutely loved. I'm a
Yep.
bit of a nerd, so I like studying. And so I did a master's in occupational psychology after that, also in Nottingham in England. And
Okay.
so yes, I was there for 4 years at that point, and then the plan was that I was gonna, move to London and pursue kind of a career in management consultancy, or at the time, I'd applied to the head office of Rolls-Royce, which was in this town called Derby.
Yeah.
And I kind of got on that interview process, and I was super excited. And just as kind of that process was continuing, and it was kind of the last year of university, last year of my master's, I just kind of had a sense. I felt like, God had spoken to me that this wasn't what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And
Okay.
as you can imagine, after 4 years in university, without a clear direction as to what the next thing was, that was a bit of a bit of a shocking moment. And I was like, oh, okay. But I was so convinced by that I actually kind of withdrew all my applications from all the companies that I'd applied to, including Rolls-Royce. And then, it's a longer story, but long story short, I ended up doing an internship at the church that I was going to at the time in Nottingham. And it was a year-long unpaid internship. And when I explained that to my dissertation supervisor, who was like, hey, let's talk about maybe you can extend this and we could do a PhD or you could do academia. And I was like, oh, well, I have this other option.
I have an unpaid internship at a local church. I mean, who
was
wouldn't
like-
do that?
Right. Her face was absolutely priceless. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I know that you want to react, but you're not reacting the way you want to react.
Yeah.
But I did that internship, and literally, probably after the first week, I was like, well, this is what I was made to do. This is everything that I would want to do, paid or unpaid, for the rest of my life. I would do this.
Yeah.
And so I finished that internship, and then I started working for that church as well.
Okay.
And I was there for 11 years in total,
Wow.
7 of those on staff, until I met Dev,
Yes.
who was... We met at his younger brother's wedding.
Okay.
His younger brother married one of my best friends from Sri Lanka.
Okay.
So we were in the bridal party together, and he
Yes.
was living in Australia at the time in Perth. And yeah, we kind of met, and that was it. And
That's awesome.
then once we got married, I moved over to Perth, and here we are.
That's what you're doing now. So Dev's family is originally from Sri Lanka as well. Is that right? So you
That's
both grew up in Sri Lanka. Give me kind of high level. How would you describe Sri Lankan culture if you had to describe it in, say, a couple of sentences?
Sure. Warm.
Warm. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Not just in weather, but also
Yes.
in heart and
Yeah.
in people. I think Sri Lankan culture revolves a lot around food.
Okay.
So that's a huge part of kind of growing up, and it's a huge part of the culture. So, if we want to show you hospitality, we will feed you. That's
Yes.
one of the first things that they do.
Yep.
And, people will often, like random people, if you meet someone on the street, they will often invite you in for a
Yeah.
meal, like if they
Okay.
struck up a conversation with you. And so that's pretty normal.
Yeah.
Just warm, loving, and they love to have fun. Sri Lankan celebrations go on for ages, and
Okay.
everybody just loves to have a good time. It's a very collectivist culture as well, so people look out for each other, and that's part and parcel of how we were brought up as well, culturally, that you'd look out for people, you'd always help people who were less fortunate. You'd look out for people on the margins and fringes of society. So it's just all in all, just a warm hug of a country. That is a great description of a culture, a warm hug. That is a great description. So did you grow up, Sid, in a home that was religious in any way? Were you family churchgoers or anything like that? So I actually grew up in a multi-religious household. So my dad is a Buddhist and my mom was a Catholic.
Okay.
So when I grew up, and I guess the culture of Sri Lanka is the fact that it's also multicultural, very multicultural.
Yes.
So we would have people from a lot of different religions who were part and parcel of our life, and that was just the way we were. It's just what we were exposed to at the time. And in Sri Lanka itself, we would celebrate the important occasions in other religions as national holidays.
Okay.
So you would have a holiday for Ramadan, and you would have a holiday for Hajj, and you would have a holiday for Thai Pongal, and you would have a holiday for Christmas and for Easter.
Yes.
And so we would kind of take part in all these celebrations of all these different religions and cultures, which was fascinating and really great because we grew up in a way that we were aware of not just what we believed, but what everybody else believed. And we grew up in a culture where that was okay.
Yeah.
And, peace and harmony was just kind of ingrained into the culture. We had a civil war, which was pretty disruptive to that way of life. And we were kind of born into that, which was sad. And so I think a lot of the strife that maybe Sri Lanka is experiencing today came as a result of that division, which kind of in our childhood among the circles that we grew up in, that the sad thing is that it didn't have to be that way, that, people can coexist and they can live together and they can live in peace and harmony and celebrate differences rather than being marginalized because of them.
Yeah.
So I think, so that was one of the things I think growing up in a house like ours. My dad wasn't a practicing Buddhist, so it was more of a traditional thing, I guess.
Yes.
But my mum was a practicing Catholic, and so she would take us to church. And so I grew up going to church every Sunday. I also went to a convent school. So some of the private schools in Sri Lanka were run by nuns. And so, we would have mass in school. And so it was I would do confession every few months. And so it was very religious in that sense. But I think one of the things that really struck home to me was when I moved to England and I was invited to a Christian church. And I guess for me, that was the first time that I realized that I didn't just have to have religion, but I could have relationship.
Yeah.
And that was a really powerful moment for me because I hadn't experienced that before. Even after growing up with so much religiosity around me, I didn't really understand that I could have a relationship with God.
Yeah.
I thought it just had to be confined to religion.
Yeah.
So that was
That's
a pretty
amazing.
defining moment for me.
Yeah. So would you say that was when you began kind of a daily relationship with God, Sid, was when you moved to England and had that experience?
100%. Before I moved to England, I hadn't even read the Bible. I studied it because we'd had to kind of, GCSEs, religion was a requirement. And so we would kind of study it. But apart from that, I never really read it. I didn't really understand. I always thought that, God was this distant, far off being that we didn't actually have access to.
Yes.
And so I would pray, but I would pray very, I would pray out of fear because I was afraid of retribution if I didn't pray. Like I would fail my exams if I didn't pray.
Yeah.
I'd get hit by a car if I didn't pray. So that was the kind of relationship that I thought that I could have with God. And so then moving to England and hearing, I guess, and maybe being in a place where I was open to hearing that I could know God for myself as well, and people showing me how I could do that.
Yes.
I started reading the Bible and started actually experiencing the presence of God for myself, and that was just life-changing.
Yeah. Wow. It's amazing how that sometimes somebody can be so close to something but yet not discover its true meaning until later on in life. Although I sometimes am convinced as well, this is not, by the way, a biblical phrase. I think I stole this from Miyagi-san in Karate Kid.
Great movie.
Yeah, but he said, the teacher will appear when the student is ready. And so sometimes we may not be ready to hear or receive something.
Love that. Yeah.
And the timing is such later on in life that we're now in a place where we're able to hear it and receive it. So that's
Absolutely.
fantastic. It's incredible to me, Sid, how much our formative years, childhoods, that sort of thing, shape how we think and shape our worldviews. I know for me, growing up in church, my dad has been a pastor my entire life and long before I was born even. But the tradition of church that I grew up in, women were not a part of the leadership structure of the church. Certainly were not preachers or communicators in any way, shape, or form. But my mom is actually an incredible leader. And she's a really gifted speaker. She was allowed to speak at women's conferences and things like that, as long as there were no men in the room. That was okay. And I used to always think to myself, if my parents had been in maybe a different denomination of church or a different tradition, my mom would have had a much larger role to play in their leadership. And I feel like, in a sense, the churches that we were a part of missed out in some ways on her gifts. So it sounds like to me, though, Sid, you got plugged into a church that was very much aware of women having great gifts of leadership and communication and so on. Have you ever run into any hurdles, though, where you've had to overcome some things as a female in leadership, in faith settings, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, great question. I think you're right, and you've hit the nail on the head. For me, I was really blessed that from the get-go, I was around people in churches who championed women. And all my bosses, all my line managers, when I was working, they've mostly actually been men, and they've been my greatest support. They've been my greatest encouragers. And presently, even, sitting under Daniel, who's the senior pastor of the church I'm in now, right from the get-go, he's been the one who's been like, no, please speak. Please, can you, I'd like you to do it more. And I'm like, let me see. And so he's been such a huge champion and such a huge, encourager and supporter of me and having women in leadership and in terms of teaching and preaching as well. So that's been a huge blessing. And actually, hearing stories like the story of your mom, it's something that I don't take for granted, because I know that that's not true for everybody in every place. But there also have been, instances where in a particular church, there were maybe one or two men who, when I came on the preaching roster, refused to come to church because they didn't believe in women speakers. So there have, been instances like that. Funny thing is, a few months on, they've become my biggest fans, and I get rapturous emails. That's awesome. About sermons, which is awesome. So I guess they've changed their minds, which is fantastic. Yeah. And then sometimes if I'm speaking in different venues or in different churches or at different speaking engagements, Dev, my husband, will often go with me, and so Sidhara Udalagama is not the most common name in the world. No. So if someone doesn't know what I look like, often we've come into spaces and someone on the door would say, oh, hey, great to have you with us. And they would automatically extend their hand to Dev and say, we're so looking forward to hearing you speaking.
And I'm sure Dev is probably mortified, thinking, you don't want me getting up there.
Dev's like, great, give me a microphone. But no, he would say, oh, actually, it's lovely to meet you too, but actually it's my wife who's speaking to you today. So, and that's not happened just once. It's happened multiple times. And not way back when, pretty recently. Pretty recently,
yeah. Okay.
Right. So I think for me, the key thing is in those situations, someone asked me once, do you get offended by that? And actually, honestly, I don't. And I think it's because I don't think it's out of malicious intent. I think it's just ignorance.
Yes.
And so for me, Stephen Furtick said this great thing, I think, a while back. He said, offense is a situation, but offended is a decision. And so for me, I can choose to live offended by things. But I think, what will that help? Who am I going to change that way? Whose perception am I going to change that way? And so for me, I just focus on being the best version of myself, not as a female, but as a human being.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, well, if given that experience, that gives other people the best chance to change their mind about anything. And so for me, I'm like, cool, well, I believe that God has called me into some spaces and called me into outworking a purpose. And so I'm just going to focus on doing that to the best of my ability in every way I possibly can.
Yeah.
And then that allows, I think, other people a chance to change their mind should they choose to do so.
Yeah. You have mentioned, Sid, now a couple of times, actually 3 times, you've mentioned this phrase in this conversation about this question I just asked you. You've mentioned the phrase, change their mind. And you talked about some men who refused to go to church when you were the one speaking, who changed their mind. You talked about, even just a moment ago, you used that phrase again. And I think that is such a key lesson for great leaders, to be able to look back and say, it's okay to change your mind.
Right.
Because I may have thought one thing, but was ignorant in the nicest sense of the term.
Yep.
But I've become more aware of something now, and it's okay to change my mind on things that need to be changed. And so
Totally.
I think that's such a great thing, that none of us are stuck. The past is not, something that has to shape and form our future,
Right.
but we can change our minds and move forward with that. So no, it's fantastic. I was
Absolutely.
hanging out on your Instagram page recently, and I noticed in your profile that you love, you put it this way, I think, faith, family, food, fitness, and fun.
Yeah.
But then I saw that you wrote an article recently about fitness, and in the article you were like, hey, I am the last person on the planet to have
True.
ever thought of writing an article on fitness. So I've got a couple of questions for you, because you've gone through a bit of a transformation recently around
Yeah.
fitness.
That's right.
You said in the article that you actually had started some fitness kind of things in the past, but they hadn't stuck. And then you mentioned that it was some short-term goals that you set for yourself that had really helped you kind of accomplish some of the things you wanted to do. Give me a little insight into why you think this one was the one that stuck and wasn't like the others. And then what did those short-term goals look like practically that helped you get to some transformation that you wanted?
Yeah. So, I think for me, it's funny that we've talked about kind of changing your mind. It was actually a mindset change.
Okay.
Actually, no, I think it was more of a desire. So it was the fact that I wanted to change before, but I wasn't willing to pay the cost of it. So for me, that means that I didn't want it as much.
Yeah.
So I think before, when I started, I was like, oh yes, I do want to do this. I want to get fit. I want to get healthy. I want to get in shape, but I can't do this. I won't do this. I'm just not that kind of person.
Yeah.
And I think for me, this time around, I said, no, this is what I want, and I'm going to do it whatever it takes.
Yeah.
No holds barred. Cool. You want me to run? I'll run. Cool. I have to eat celery? I'll eat celery. Whatever. I mean, I didn't, but
Yes.
whatever it took, that was the kind of mentality. And also, I think this time around, I was more self-aware. So I think being self-aware is really key when you're looking to change anything, not just physically or not just fitness-wise, but knowing what works and what doesn't work for you, what makes you tick. For me, like you mentioned, short-term goals. I'm a little bit achievement oriented and goal oriented. So short-term goals really work for me. So practically I'd be like, cool, well, by June, I want to do a pull-up. By September, I want to have lost this much. So there would be, short-term goals, and we'd work towards that and aim towards that. So there was a purpose in something. I wasn't just kind of floundering around and seeing what happened.
Yeah.
We were working on purpose towards something with a purpose. And so that was really key. And I think for me, the biggest key in all of it has to be my trainer, who's also one of our best friends. And for me, I need external motivation. So if I kind of just relied on myself, this probably wouldn't have happened. So I know myself, I need some external motivation. And so Rohan has been such a key player in this whole fitness journey and in the transformation itself. And having someone to track that with, someone who knows what they're doing, someone who's going to push you, but not in a way that's going to injure you, but is going to push you in a way that's going to inspire you and is going to want you to achieve more than even you think you can achieve, that's been really great for me. And that's been such a key. And I think the biggest reason why it's actually stuck is that I actually like exercise now.
Okay.
I said it out loud.
I like exercise now.
I know.
Yes.
Who would have thought?
That's fantastic.
Jason, you're going to laugh at this. So I was the person, when I was in England, the church that I was a part of used to be on the top of a slight hill.
Okay.
And the city was kind of at the bottom of this slight hill. So I used to, if I'd gone down to the city, sometimes, and if I had a few shopping bags with me, I'd take a taxi from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill to get back up to church. So that was me.
Yeah. So exercise was just not a part of your regular routine at all. Do you exercise daily now? What does that look like now?
Yeah, so I probably would do 6 times a week. So,
okay.
Monday through to Saturday. Sunday's usually a rest day. So it's just part and parcel of life. But let me not, paint an unrealistic picture. So like during quarantine, the gyms were closed.
Yes.
Literally, like, what was I doing? Baking and eating.
Baking
and for 2 weeks, I literally did no exercise because I had... I was a little bit unwell and they weren't sure whether I actually had the coronavirus or not. So I had to go and get tested. Yep. And then it was self-isolation, so I couldn't do anything, didn't want to go anywhere, obviously. And then, after that, the weather wasn't great and it started raining. So for 2 weeks, I literally did no exercise at all. Yep. But then kind of got back on it and I was like, oh yeah, I missed this. I really missed this.
Yeah.
So it's, it's never a linear progression like that.
Sure.
And you have dips and you have, just a few off weeks sometimes. But I think consistency wise, the fact that you get up and you keep going and you get back on it, I think that's really the key to it all. Consistency is key, like they say.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of consistency, I know there are some things that communicators and speakers do consistently to help them improve. And I would love to kind of dive into what some of those routines and rhythms are for you, because there are a lot of people out there that maybe dream of communicating, maybe dream of being in a role where they get to speak on a regular basis like you do. And so I would love to know a couple of your routines or rhythms that you do as it relates to preparation. So some things that you do on a regular basis to consistently prepare, how you go about delivery. What are some of the things that you think through when you're actually delivering a message or a speech? Yeah. And then I know evaluation is super important for people that are communicating, to constantly be improving and looking for, how can I do this better? How can I communicate this more effectively? So maybe would you mind just walking us through kind of behind the scenes, backstage with Sid, preparing delivery and evaluation when you're speaking?
Sure, of course. So, for me, I'm still learning. So I'm kind of tweaking and seeing what works and trying a few different things out just to see where things land. But there are a few consistent things that really work for me. So in terms of preparation, I think regardless of whether I'm speaking to a faith circle or whether sometimes I have the opportunity of speaking in a corporate setting, delivering training, or the not-for-profit sector as well. But for me, the way I'm wired and what I believe is that what I have is a gift from God. And so for me, that's always my starting point. And I remember saying to God, when I first started kind of communicating in any way, shape or form, I was petrified, like absolutely petrified. And I remember saying to God, if this is something that, I'm going to do, then we kind of have to make a deal that you will always give me the words I need to say. So I always need a God idea, or I always need something from you that's just not something that I've just mustered up myself. And this was, 10 years ago now, but I feel like God heard that little prayer. And it's kind of been that way ever since. So my starting point is always God. I'm always like, okay, well, God, what do you think about this? Open up my eyes, Holy Spirit, I want to be enlightened in the way that I can help somebody else, and actually in the process help myself. I want to know more about this. I want to be changed as a part of this, and so that's always my starting point. Preparation wise, so that's, I guess, the spiritual element of it. Practically, for me, like I said, I'm a pen and paper girl, so I'll grab my preaching notepad that I have, and I kind of draw mind maps, and as I believe kind of God speaks to me, I write stuff down. It takes me a few days to prepare a message, because I like to live in it. I kind of ruminate in it, and when I'm brushing my teeth or I'm doing the groceries, it's constantly on my mind, and I kind of live it out almost, and then phrases and words and examples and things just kind of connect together. So I give it that time, so I know myself, and I need time to do that process, and live in it a fair bit. One of the things then, kind of when it comes to delivery, is I can't remember whether I said this or whether someone said it to me a while back. So if you're out there and you're watching this and you're like, no, I said that, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I just don't remember it. But someone said, or I said, just because it's good, it doesn't mean it needs to be said. And that's been one of the most helpful things for me when it comes to delivery. I'm thinking about, okay, well, what are we trying to do here? And I might have 100 good things to say, but maybe there are just 10 that are really necessary for this piece of communication. So, well, okay, how do I streamline that? And from a delivery point of view, my aim always is for people to encounter God in whatever way that is. Now, even in a secular setting, I'm like, the Holy Spirit can work through anything. And so my aim is that they would encounter God in, we're talking about burnout in a corporate setting. I believe that they can encounter God through that in some way, shape, or form. So that's always my heart, is that it wouldn't just be about me, but it would actually be about them connecting to something of the heart of God. Obviously, that would be more clear-cut in a faith-based setting. Yeah. And I heard a quote by Nicky Gumbel, I think it was, a while back. And he said that anything that doesn't come from the depth of you won't connect to the depth in another person. Yeah. And so that really resonated with me, perhaps because that's kind of my style as well. I kind of birth a message, if you will. And so when I get to delivering it, it's kind of bubbling up inside of me. It's I feel it. I'm living it. I'm carrying something. And then when it comes to delivery, I want to connect to the depth in someone else. I want to go deep into where, we're not talking about, the words don't have to be deep, but there's a way that you connect to the depth in somebody else. And I'm not even talking about emotion. I'm talking about revelation. Yeah. I've been in settings where somebody said something, and it's not even the words that they're using, but those words are a portal to kind of something going, aha, in me. Something's clicked, the penny has dropped. I've seen something that I didn't see before, and that's actually led me to change how I lived my life. Yeah. And that's what I want. I want you to be moved into action. Yeah. Even if those words are a portal or a vehicle for you to get, something that you haven't seen before, that's what I want. I want there to be lasting fruit, lasting change as a result of what you're hearing. So it's not just something that you hear on a Sunday, or it's not just something that you heard one time, but even one of those lines that's gonna stick with you, and that's gonna now change the way you then behave Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and so on. So I guess going back to the preparation phase, I'm a preparer, so I believe that the more prepared I am, the more spontaneous I can be. Yeah. And so for me, preparation, it looks like, I would craft every line and every word until I know that it flows well, and would think about the introduction, the middle, and the end, where I want to take people on a journey. I want to start here, and then I want to take them there, but I don't want to lose them in the middle. So how do we get from point A to point B? What's going to interest me in this? Yeah. How am I going to be helped by this? And then I think about who's listening to this. How is, Joe blogs, what is he going to take away from this? Or Jane blogs, why is she going to be interested in this? what's going to appeal to Jack blogs. So it's all of those things that come into making something and creating something and really crafting something that's going to be relevant and applicable, and more than anything, that's going to serve the people that are listening to it. So I guess that's kind of a little bit of a rundown of that. And evaluation.
Yeah.
So this is something that I need to do more of, that I admit that I don't do enough of, and that's watching myself back.
Yeah.
It's for me, it's one of the best ways to improve, when you can see yourself and watch it back and be in that moment of delivery. Because I know that you would know this, Jason, but for me, when I'm up there and I'm delivering it, I'm in the moment, and I'm all caught up in that. So it's impossible to know how that's coming across or how that's translating, unless you kind of watch that back. And then for me, just having a group of people who know me and are comfortable enough to be honest with me, really, really honest. That's really helpful for me. Like, that is so key. Sometimes even in between messages, like say we have, say 3 services, or 4 or 5, in between them, Dev, my husband, would be one of those people for sure. And, he would come to me and he'd say, do you know what? Are you scared? Like, why are you not? I know that you're hiding behind something. What's the problem? Like, that's not you. Come on. You got more in you than that. I know you. Yeah. And in that moment, I'm like, oh, go away. But actually, that's really helpful. And I'm like, yeah, actually, you're right. Do you know what? I feel like this. Cool. So you know how to rework it. But people who know you and who can call you out on some stuff and encourage you and support you and just give you a well-rounded critique or evaluation, that's been really, really key for me. Yeah.
Such a gift. I have to say, the 2 things, you mentioned 2 things that have been super helpful over the years for me. Watching back messages, our mutual friend Jeff Henderson, I learned that from him years ago. He said, watching yourself back is probably one of the best ways to evaluate.
That's it.
And then getting a collection of people around you. I think that, some key thoughts in that. You mentioned this. They need to be people that are really for you. Because if they are for you, they're going to be honest with you. They're going to tell you the truth. But they're going to do it in a way that's not hurtful or demeaning in any way that makes you not want to get back up there and do it again. Right. So I think those are 2 excellent things. Hey, you're involved in your current role, Sid, in developing leaders and developing people. In fact, your current title of your role at the church you serve at now is People Development Director. So talk to us about, when it comes to not just, you've talked a little bit about developing yourself, but when it comes to developing others, could you maybe highlight for us maybe 2 or 3 things that you feel like have been some of the go-to things that you try to work on first, or maybe introduce people to when you're developing either just, a person or a leader? I personally think everybody has the potential to lead. And so leadership development, what are those key things that you like to focus in on, 2 or 3 things?
Yeah, so especially here in my current role, we focus on probably 3 things right at the very start, and then kind of build on those things over time. But we like to encourage, equip, and empower. So encourage in the sense of give courage. So like you said, I believe too that anybody can lead, and the sphere can look different, and what that is, how the outworking of that can look different. But everybody can be a leader in some capacity or the other. But it's funny that a lot of people don't believe that about themselves. And so right from the get-go, encourage or giving courage is really, really important, or found it really important, especially here where I am, in my current role. But actually that's true of anybody all over the world. I think that would translate and that would relate. A lot of people don't believe that they have the power to, or they have the capacity or the ability to be a leader, not realizing that they're actually already leaders in the spheres that they're in. Yeah. And so encouraging and giving courage, I think part of that is relational. I think leadership development doesn't work if it's not relational, in a sense. Like everybody has to be known by somebody. And as somebody that sees you, as somebody that knows you, and that somebody will then know how to encourage you and give courage to you in your particular situation. So never mind as leaders, but just as human beings, I think that's a fundamental thing for everybody, to be seen, to know that you matter, and that you are heard. And so I think that's the foundation, or that's the start of building or leading or developing a leader or developing a human being, let's say.
Yeah.
And then I think then after that, they need to know how you do that. And so that's where the equipping comes into place. And some of that is practical, some of that can be spiritual, whatever that looks like. How do I now outwork this mantle of leadership, or this position of leadership, or this designation? How do I do that? And so that's where the equipping comes in. And then I think one of the things that's so key is empowering. It's the releasing for them to actually go and do the things that you've encouraged them to do and equip them to do, to give them the space. And part of that is, and I think this is probably changing, but, for a lot of us, we're scared of mistakes and scared of, getting it wrong sometimes. I know I am. And so, the empowering of someone to say, hey, listen, I want you to go and try this. Listen, we've encouraged you, we've equipped you as best we can. Here's a safe space for you. Now go try it out. Go do what you need to do. Because the truth is, you can learn a lot of theory and you can, be in a little bit of a bubble, but until you get out there and, get your hands dirty and get it going and, walk what you're actually been talking about, you don't actually understand what all of this is. And so working it out and walking it out, I think, is such a huge part of that. And then, you kind of still have that safe space to come back to, and you have support and you have guidance and you have encouragement. And so those for me would be the three key things: encouragement, equipment, and then empowerment after that.
Yeah. I love what you said about failure. I think the fear of failure is the thing that holds so many of us back from giving the gift that God has given us to the world. And there are so many gifts, I think, that are held back from being given to the world because of the fear of failure, including even the development of other people. As I'm listening to that, I'm thinking to myself, not only is that fear of failure going to stop that person that I'm developing from maybe going and trying something out and piloting it for themselves, but I think there may be even many people that are listening to this who have never thought about developing another leader or developing another human being. I love how you say that. And it's because of their own fear of saying, I'm not good enough to develop anybody else. I'm not developed enough myself yet. And yet that fear of failure, I think, could be the very thing that holds them back from the gift that God wants to use them to give. It's so important.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think, now that you mentioned, that's such a good point, because I believe that all of us, we have something to give to somebody else. Everybody has something to contribute. And so even when you're developing another person, I think there's an expectation, or maybe a false expectation, that you yourself have to have it all together, you know, or you yourself have to be perfect, that you yourself have to have all the answers. And actually that's not true at all.
No.
You bring of yourself and you give of what you do have, but so often we focus on what we don't have rather than focusing on what we do have. And so when it comes to but for me, part of that comes down to generosity as well. Like, I want to be generous with myself. I want to be generous with my finances, with my substance, with what I have. But I also want to be generous with myself. I want to give you of myself, not just what I have. And I think that can be so powerful when you connect like that with somebody else, when you give of yourself. I think, that's such an incredible way to form those connections, and that can develop and continue for ages and for the rest of your life almost.
Yeah.
But you're right. But if you're too scared, or if you think that you have nothing to give, or you're too afraid of giving something that you might get it wrong, then no other person gets to experience the fullness of who you are in that sense. And that is a shame.
Yeah. Giving of yourself is such an important truth, and especially when you're a leader or you're leading others. You and I have talked several times about this concept of soul care, which a big part of this podcast is not just helping people reach their goals, that they have personally or professionally or physically or spiritually, whatever it is, but to do so in such a way where they don't lose their soul along the way. And it's been said before that you really have nothing to give of yourself if you haven't filled yourself first. And so I would love to know, what are the practices, what are the things that you find as a communicator, as a leader, a developer of other people? What are some of the life-giving soul care practices that you engage in on a regular basis that you feel like allows you to then be able to give out of the overflow of your life?
Yeah, I think I've kind of come to these practices and let's say rhythms after getting it wrong for a fair number of years. And even now, they keep continually being tweaked, and different seasons demand different things and different rhythms. So I think probably one of the key things for me is, this is probably the one constant in every single season, is my relationship with God. The minute I don't have time for it, or I don't invest into it, or I kind of do it half-heartedly, for me, my life gets off kilter. I get off kilter as a person. And I'm not saying, I'm not talking about 3 hours at a time every single day. That's not what I mean. But I'm talking about meaningful connection. Sometimes all I have is 10 minutes in a day, but I try and make those 10 minutes meaningful, in the sense of where I've actually had a meaningful connection with God. So it's not just hey, I've now read a chapter of my Bible today. That's not it. Where am I going to find meaning? Where am I actually going to experience the presence of God? And sometimes for me, that's just listening to 10 minutes of worship.
Yeah.
And I might be crying or whatever that looks like. But for me, that would be reading 2 chapters of the Bible sometimes. And I'm like, Holy Spirit, I know that you're going to speak to me. I know that you're going to speak to my heart, and you're going to encourage me in some way. And he does, because the one thing I know about God is that he longs to hang out with us way more than we want to hang out with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, that's the foundation: meaningful connection every single day with God. That's where my soul care starts. And I guess the other rhythms would be, for me, exercise, I've said, a newfound rhythm. But I actually have found that when I am strong physically, I'm strong mentally, emotionally, in my relationships. I'm strong in so many, or pretty much in every single other area. But the physical aspect of exercise has a knock-on effect on pretty much every single other area of my life. And so I didn't realize that until a few years ago, but now it's definitely an indispensable part of life, and about being healthy, not just physically, but also internally. And the other thing I think would be, I've learnt the art finally of saying no. Which I was never very good at for a very long time. My husband now says I'm becoming a little bit too good at it.
That's good.
But it's this. I always used to feel guilty saying no to anybody. And I guess in the past I've been a huge people pleaser, so I would never want to disappoint. I would never want to say no, because I guess there was a part of me that needed people to like me. And that was exhausting, to be honest. And so, a few years ago, God, kind of did a fair upheaval in and of myself, where, I was, came face to face with some of this stuff. And that was actually depleting my soul, because everything I was doing was from a place of I needed to be liked, or I needed to please that person or this person. And that drains your soul. It drains your energy. It drains the life right out of you. And so coming back to a place where, I guess I don't need that from other people anymore, to a healthy place where actually in the right way I get my security, and my security is found in God. That's helped my soul in a way, and it's helped my life practically as well, because now I look at the rhythms of my life. Listen, we live in a world where everyone's busy. Maybe not for the last few months, but generally, busyness and being hurried is part and parcel of the lives that we live right now. And so, some seasons will be busier than others. But one thing I've learned to do over the last few years is to put in rhythms. So, I'll have a calendar and I'm like, well, okay, I know that this month or this 3 weeks, this chunk of time, this is going to be intense. So then I will book in and I will plan in a week or a few days where I know that there's going to be a rhythm of rest. And so I have to say no to a few things in that week, because you have to make time. time just doesn't magically appear. You have to carve out that time.
Yeah.
And so that would involve saying no. But I know that when I do that, the rhythms of my life line up in a way that are healthy, and I'm going to be able to give out of a place where I have something to give rather than running on empty or running on fumes. So that's been really, really helpful for me. And I guess the other and probably the last thing is I've learned the difference between crashing and resting.
Okay. Talk to us about, what do you mean by that? What's the difference there?
So for me, I rest for me sometimes looks like, hey, sitting in front of the TV with a bag of chips, and I'm good to go, and I feel really rested after that.
Yeah.
But the truth also is that if that's all I want to do for the week, then that's me crashing rather than resting. So resting for me is about engagement. So you're trying to engage. So something that's I found restful in the last few weeks is actually baking.
Yeah.
Again, never thought I'd say that, but hey, here we are. So I've been baking red velvet cupcakes and pecan pie and tiramisu and all of these kinds of things that I actually found restful. Going for walks with my husband, that's restful for me.
Yeah.
So rest for me is engaging with something, not work, not something that's gonna, that you're trying to shut off from, but you're engaging with something of the world.
Yeah.
Crashing for me is about avoidance.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in front of Netflix and I'm trying to avoid reality. I'm trying to escape reality. I don't want to think about that. And if I do too much of that, that drains me rather than replenishes me.
Yeah.
And so I've actually learned that for me, rest looks like something. And I'm not saying that, sitting in front of Netflix and eating a bag of chips, that's not good once in a while. Of course it is. I do it all the time. But I just don't do too much of it. And that's not all I do, because I know that is going to lead to crashing rather than resting, avoidance rather than engagement.
Yeah. I love what you said there, Sid, about the things that are replenishing and the things that are draining. And that's the indicator for you of whether or not it's actually rest or crashing. I also love that you tied together your soul care practice there of practicing not pleasing people is actually very much life-giving and part of your soul care rhythms, which is so, so critical. I love that. Well, Sid, this has been so much fun getting to know you a little bit better. But also, I think you've given us some really practical insights into how we can both reach our goals, but also do so in a way that we don't lose our soul in the process. So I would love it, though, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you or they wanted to connect with you, they had a question about whether it's communicating or leading people or developing others or your soul care practices, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Is it via social media, email? What's the best way?
Don't call me.
Yes, that's right. Text. Yeah, don't call. Definitely text. Whatever you do, do not call her. Yeah.
Don't call.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. But social media would be a really good way. I'm kind of always on there, so I would see that. So Instagram is Sidhara U, so SIDHARAU. Email also sidhara@hotmail.com.
Very
Super
cool.
Easy, really, really easy. So would love to hear from anybody who had a question or even some comments. Would love to hear from you. So hit me up.
Yeah, will do. Well, thank you again for your time. Tell Deb we said hi, and
Will do.
Look forward to the next time we catch up. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Really big fan of Jason Perkins. So yeah, go great. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.